So moving on. So another thing related to not the areas that you're guessing in, but very much Google and kind of um, the Street View system itself. Something that very much falls under the category of what we like to call meta is the camera quality. There are four different types of camera quality, and some are better than others, you might say. So when people reference, you might have seen in chat people referencing Gen, and they'll say, "Oh, that's Gen 1 or that's Gen 2." That just means the camera generation of the camera they've glued on top of the Google car. So let's just take a quick look at what that looks like. So first and foremost, we've got the lovely Generation 1. Um, this is taken from North Dakota, I can see. Um, as you see, very pixelated, very blown out. The contrast is kind of all over the place. Um,
And even if you have a road sign in front of your face, you can't read it properly.
yeah, even with the answer on a sign, it's not going to help you. So, I mean, in terms of Generation One coverage, is it? I don't feel like I see this very often. Is it something that's more rare these days?
Well, in most of good maps like a diverse world or a balanced world or improved world, they stay away from these types of locations just because of how bad they
Bean
are. So you shouldn't
boy.
see any in those types of maps. But then, of course, if you go on the normal world map, you're gonna see this a lot more often.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
that makes
Handpicked
sense.
maps have often no generation one.
Interesting. So if somebody's hand making a map, they'll avoid it completely. But if you're playing the official things, it's going to be something that crops up, maybe a little bit more often than the better ones. So that's Generation One. Something that is slightly more common, I've seen more of, is Generation Two. So this is a Gen Two camera. Again, not actually half bad. We've got a clearer picture here. I still think it can be difficult to read signs that are off in the distance a little bit, and the colours are a little bit off. But I think some of the most defining factors, and this is where I might be wrong, guys, is Generation Two famous for the kind of halo thing? Is that exclusive to Gen Two?
It is. It is. I've never seen Generation 3 with a Sky Halo or Generation 4.
Okay, right, interesting. So, well,
Cobbler can appear, but we'll get to that later. But the Sky Halo, it is Generation 2.
right, okay, interesting. So, what we're looking at here is this kind of halo that sits above the car. It kind of causes this shadow. Almost looks like a ridge. As a ridge, if you know what ridge is, we'll talk about that at some point as well. But it kind of this blurry, weird element that's over the top of the car, and then obviously you've got some kind of blur around the bottom of it as well. So Gen 2 very much defined by that. And again, I think, as I said, you see it more often than Gen 1, but still a little bit of a rarity.
Yeah, I think most countries have had their Gen 2 replaced. There's like a few countries that have like just Gen 2, and so usually you can those that's a helpful way to recognize those countries, but we'll go into that later, of
Okay.
course.
Definitely. And map makers aren't shy to put Generation 2 in because actually you can read signs.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
got
massive
a
step up, isn't it?
capability.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so brilliant. And then obviously, I think this, and I might be wrong, but this is the most common generation, which is Gen 3. Um,
Hmm.
which again, huge step up, I think, in terms of clarity. You can now pick out quite clearly very, very tiny details on the floor. You can see quite clearly into the distance. We've not got that type of halo over the top. And yeah, just very clear picture. And yeah, am I right in saying this is probably the most common coverage that we see?
It is.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, and this is just pretty generic, pretty standard, and this is what you'll be used to guessing on when you play on, your more standardized maps, like a diverse world, so on and so forth. And then the wonderful, gorgeous Gen 4, which is the latest Google camera. generation. There isn't one above this. I don't know if they're working on one, but this is certainly the latest. And again, not quite a drastic improvement like we've seen from Gen 1 upwards, but certainly, again, slightly more improved. And I think I tend to notice this one in Austria the most. Um,
Mm-hmm.
am I right in saying is Austria all Gen 4 or is it a mixture? What?
It's not all Gen 4. The Western states, the westernmost half, I reckon to say, as also Gen 3 because the pictures were taken a few years before,
Okay,
but the eastern half has newer pictures.
right, got you. That makes sense. So, yeah, I think in Austria you notice it because I think a lot of the coverage is occurred on quite a sunny, nice day, and it looks very it looks very
Yeah,
nice.
they drove in summer.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's definitely a pretty place. So I think I often go, oh, this is nice. Is it Austria? So that's the generation of cameras there. Now the question is how do you know what places have what generation of camera being used in them and what rate of use in them, so on and so forth. And this is a harder question to answer because it's actually quite varied and quite complicated. There are resources.
Mostly it's based on experience. Play,
They
play, play.
Yeah, they and that's exactly what a lot of this is. It's about learning and about kind of taking on board that information. But there are resources that people have put together for this kind of stuff. Here, for example, is a Google Doc that exists that helps break down the generation of cameras, what the coverage is like if they've got all of them, if they've got one of them, if they've got more of the others, so on and so forth. And these kind of resources exist. We'll be happy to host these within the Discord. They're shared across all different types of platforms. Nothing that we've come up with. So you can find this information all over the shop. We'll be talking about where to find information for GeoGuessr tips and tricks later on. But this is one way you can help learn them. But I guess one of the big ways is simply just playing the game and getting an idea of, oh, this is a lower quality camera. Judging by what I can see on the screen, and that is probably going to be in that area. Yeah, a lock I believe runs this. Am I getting the name right? I always get mocked for saying a lot.
Yeah, Alloc, I think.
Yeah, there we
Yeah,
go.
alloc. I always say alloc.
Yeah, a lot. So yeah, and then there's also this is where the description of the generations comes from. That's where I got it. Um, there's other resources in here like the cars map and that sort of stuff as well. So that's essentially the generation of cameras, right? So if you see people talking about, oh, it was this and gen this, they're factoring in that aspect of the meta into their guess because it can help you point in a direction. But as you say, that's ever changing. I think there's one element of that we didn't cover, which is you can have non-official car coverage, right? You can people do tie um, cameras onto the top of their cars and go driving about, and what that's called ARI. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, it's an ongoing meme in the GeoGuessr community because the first guy who did this was from Finland, and his name was Ari Immonen.
Right.
He basically ruined all of Finland because of that.
Well, there you go. So somebody says ARI, then there's the story behind that one. Then, um, so I guess the next thing to move on to again Google cars. So this is something we're just going to kind of briefly cover. We're not going to go into detail about where the Google cars may or may not be, and what countries they're tied to, because there's a wide variance of different types of cars that are used, and we'll cover those when we actually get to talking about the specific countries in future episodes. But again, fantastic resource from a lock here. Ooh, wrong camera. Here we're looking at a map of where we see. This is what we're looking at, a map of where we see different car coverage. And as you can see, plenty of different cars: white, black, red, bars, trekkers, different mixtures of cars in some sort of areas. And this can really help you determine um, where you are in the world. So looking at the car, it should be always part of you factoring in a guess. I think the classic example of this is always going to be the Ghana meme. So if you go onto coverage in Ghana, what you'll see is the wonderful black tape meme. So we have a Google car that's got a rack on the top, or bars, which they're most commonly referred to as, and specifically the bars in Ghana have a little bit of black tape um, tied around them. So you see a car with bars, and you look for the tape, and then suddenly you know where you are. Doesn't give you the exact location, obviously. You still got to make a guess based on that information, but it helps narrow it down significantly. So, looking at the cars and learning what cars are where, or what type of cars you might be able to get in an area is a really good way of narrowing down the potential amount of countries you might be guessing for those more ambiguous guesses. If somewhere is doesn't have it's not too information rich, the car can really help narrow that down. Have you guys got anything to share about cars? I think cars are pretty straightforward, right? Aren't they?
Yeah, I think just try and um, uh, just memorize like which ones are which, like yeah, and eventually you'll start like understanding which one's which, and it just becomes something that you get used to, and like it's like just a part of like what you check when you're like looking around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mongolia is the second most famous example, I'd say.
yeah. We're going to have a look at Mongolia, I guess, later on. Actually, I've prepared a little video to go through. Um, so yeah, that's one of the things to factor in, which is the Google cars. A lot of people do mention. I thought, I find it funny that you're able to guess the location based on the Google car. Once you once you've learned a couple of these things, it really just comes as second nature. It will just trigger the country in your head immediately after playing for a
I
little
don't know why it shouldn't be a valid clue.
bit. Classic.